Good afternoon, everyone. Happy August. I think we're ready to start this Teaching and Learning Committee meeting. And we are going to start looking at end-of-the-year performance data.
Yes. So while the team is coming up, for the public, I'm Teresa Jones. I serve as the Chief Achievement and Accountability Officer here for the district. And we're going to start today's meeting with two assessment-related topics. The first one is our end-of-year performance review. This is when we sort of take a look back and see what we can learn from the formative assessment data around how our students are performing. What does that mean as we've been implementing new curricula in some cases, et cetera. And then after we have the end-of-year performance review, we're going to talk about the assessment strategy for the upcoming year. So as the team looks like they are ready to rock and roll, I'm going to turn it over to them. I will remind folks that there's a lot of information in this end-of-year performance presentation, and we have 30 minutes set aside. So we are going to ask the team to sort of hit the high points and as necessary for folks to the materials that have been posted so that we can get through as much of it as possible. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Heather Nolan. I'm the Director of Knowledge Management in the Office of Achievement and Accountability.
Good afternoon. I'm Beth Sappy, the Director of Mathematics.
Good afternoon. I'm Ashley Cook, the Director of Literacy, Languages, and Culture.
So for our school year 18-19 end-of-year performance review, we're going to recap and orient everyone again as to what our 18-19 assessment strategy was, and then dive deep into the ELA performance and then math performance, and then touch upon one of our specific group of schools that were identified as our CEIS, or Coordinated Early Intervention Services schools, and what their reading performance was as a targeted group. So as a recap for our school year 18-19 assessment strategy, we really focused in the interim and common formative end, so on the upper left-hand corner, administering assessments in K2 that were targeted around foundational literacy skills, and that's our Amplify assessment. On the math end, for grades 1 through 11, we administered the ANet interim math assessments. This is our second year of administering this interim. And then for grades 1 to 2 in math, and then 3 to 11 in math and reading, we required the administration of iReady for a BOY, and then for particular focus schools, they also administered BOY and EOY, and so that's part of the presentation that we'll go into. In addition, this year, now on the bottom left-hand side, we implemented as part of the Wit and Wisdom curriculum our new reads assessments and our end-of-module assessments. So we'll touch upon our learnings from the end-of-module assessments on ELA as it relates to how are we progress monitoring and informing what instructional changes we're making, as well as how we're supporting specific students utilizing our interim and common formatives and our classroom formative assessments for the school year. So going into our ELA assessments, again, for grades K and 2, we administer our Amplify assessments. That's our DIBELS, the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills, and our TRC, our Text Reading and Comprehension, in grades K to 2. This assesses students' progress from beginning of year, middle of year, to end of year on foundational literacy skills. For this deck, we are presenting data over time, so from school year 16-17 to school year 18-19, but also within year improvements. And then with our end of module, the end of module is delivered to students in grades K to 8. And it's really focused on assessing the mastery of our students around grade level standards. It's embedded in the delivery of our Wit and Wisdom curriculum, and we'll touch upon that. For the purpose of this presentation, we'll dive deeper on the DIBELS, but please note that our TRC results are included in the appendix. So for our early learning results, what we found that was in grades K and 1, we showed improvements with an increased number of at and above benchmark, but a decrease in the number of students well below. In grade 2, we saw flat performance at or above and a decreased number of students at the well below. Within our TRC, we did see improvements in grades 1 and 2, and especially with our grade 2 students in TRC surpassing the percentage of students at or above versus those that were well below. And we'll touch upon here some highlights from specific schools that are showing continuous improvement year over year. And then with our elementary and middle grades for wit and wisdom, we embed that data into our data link system, and we're beginning to analyze the performance at the standard level to support the curriculum implementation. So looking at our DIBELS, again, grades K to 2 over time. First thing I want to do is just draw your attention to the to the blues and the gray lines. Those are the percent of students at or above proficiency from school year 16-17 to 18-19. And the dark blue is the school year 18-19. Then the orange and yellow and red colors are the percentage of students well below. And the dark red is the percent well below in school year 18-19. And so what we see from this lens at each of the individual grades K, 1, and 2, that within the year and by the end of the year, that the trends in students performing at their levels remains relatively flat. We also are able to see that, take for example grade K, that the gap between the students at or above and well below is widening. So while so that we're seeing by the end of the year an increase in the percent of students at or above, we are seeing a decrease in the percent of students well below by end of the year. However, when we look at this trend in grades 1 and 2, we actually see the gap narrowing between the at or above and the well below students, and that's mainly attributed to the fact that we have an increase in the percent of students performing well below by the end of the year on our DIBELS assessment. Let me see, Oh, I looked at 2. Whoops. Am I looking? Oh, thank you. Sorry, I'm navigating my notes in the slides. Thanks. So while I just shared the overall district performance, there are some schools that are actually showing an increase in their students that are scoring at or above proficiency. And one of the schools that we wanted to highlight here is Cross Country Elementary School, that if you look at the performance of the at or above students, it's continuously going up each year from beginning of year to the end of year. And so this is a school that we wanted to shout out. In speaking with the school, areas that they highlighted attributed to this growth was the individual support that they were providing to teachers around coaching, the small group focus that they were providing to their students, the collaborative practices between their special education teachers, their ESOL teachers, and their general education teachers around their students. So these are all practices that we continue to observe and also want to maximize across all of our schools in the upcoming school year. Another way of looking at our DIBELS data within the year is really trying to find where is their movement. So what percentage or what proportion of our students are moving out of a below or well below designation within the year and entering into the at benchmark and above benchmark. And so here we see with these lines, I'll take you to on the left-hand side is the proportion of students across all of our schools in grades K to 2 that were performing above benchmark, benchmark, below, and well below. And then on the right-hand side, you see what percent of our students ended the year performing above, at benchmark, below, and well below. And the lines in the middle are representing the proportion of students that moved from the beginning of year in their performance level to the end of year to either the same performance level or a new performance level, whether it is above or below. So there was a group of our students that performing at benchmark at the beginning of the year did move up. So you see that blue line did move up into the above benchmark, just like there is a proportion of our students that were performing below benchmark that moved into the benchmark category. But unfortunately, as the trends are showing, the majority of students that are staying well below benchmark remain well below benchmark by the end of the year. And again, wanting to call out an example school where we are seeing movement, a large proportion of students moving out of their categories from BOY and into EOY. Here again is cross country, and where we're able to see that in that percent of students performing below benchmark at the beginning of the year, 13.9%, we are seeing 16.9%, we are seeing a large proportion of those students either moving into the benchmark category or the above benchmark category. So here again is an example of a school that while they still have a distribution of students starting the year below or well below, they are moving them within that year into the benchmark and at or above benchmark area. Our next look into the DIBELS data is around, just for our EOY, is how our student groups performed. So overall, by the end of the year, 50% or so of our students were at or above benchmark. But when we look at our student, our breakouts of student groups, we're seeing consistent trends from our prior year. And in the area of race and ethnicity, we do continue to see that our Black and Hispanic populations do underperform our white and other populations, with our white students outperforming all other student groups. This further iterates to us the need of the racial equity policy that we passed this year, and the work that we're going to continue to do to focus on our predominant population, our Black Latino students, and the supports that they're being provided throughout the year. And then finally, we do want to call out those schools that are showing improvement from school year 17-18 to 18-19 in the percent of students performing at or above in grades K to 2. So these are the list of schools that from last year end of year to this year end of year, we saw a 10-point increase in the percent scoring at or above, with cross country as the example from earlier slides. Performing at 79% in 18-19. The schools with the asterisks are those schools that we called out at the middle of year time period. So those are our schools that we're continuing to see progress within year and year over year.
So a lot of the key learnings that we can take away from the schools where we're showing kind of this year-over-year growth is really impacting and influencing our focus and how we're going to support teachers in schools next year through the literacy office. So when we were back together during MOY, we had mentioned that we had just launched a focused kindergarten pilot where we had one of our lead academic content liaisons for literacy work with a few schools on giving some intense coaching and teacher content knowledge development around foundational skills and the science of reading. So we started to see a lot of movement, one, not only in the students' progress monitoring scores, so the scores that led them from MOY to EOY, but also teacher performance. So this year, as you may have heard, we are to kind of doubling down in having an early literacy focus district-wide. So this year, we will be starting with school leaders. We launched in June, really focusing on building teacher content knowledge around the science of reading, and also ensuring that we are supporting teachers with implementing our foundational skills curriculum, which is Foundations in grades K to 2. And pairing up not only their content knowledge, but also the implementation of that curriculum so our students in grades kindergarten through second really get the very best foundational skills instruction. So this, our kind of like journey, what we've learned from this year and how we're scaling this up next year is really illustrated here. Yesterday was our first, our kickoff for a cohort of teachers, of about 300 teachers right now who are in a 4-day intensive institute that will carry on through a course of study for the year with our letters training. And letters are the language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. And again, it is a foundational skills course that really helps educators understand the science of reading. So for all of the years of research, we know that teaching reading definitely is like rocket science. We are investing in building teacher content knowledge. So we're scaling that up through our letters cohort. We are also building that capacity and that content knowledge with our school leaders this year during their community learning network sessions, and also providing other opportunities for teachers in kindergarten through second grade, or other teachers who may have students that are missing, have some skill gaps in those foundational literacy skills in older grades, to have access to some of that content knowledge. So this year we're definitely going to focus in on building teacher content knowledge around the science of reading for all of our teachers. In terms of curriculum focus, so we have had Foundations as our foundational skills curriculum for almost 8 years now. And in June, we started Leadership Institute with school leaders and teachers to really kind of reset and norm what our implementation expectations are around implementing Foundations. So there'll be some renewed and reinvigorated expectation setting and support that we are giving all of our K to teachers around implementing Foundations so that they have the resources but also the professional learning to accompany it so that they can make the best instructional decisions using the curriculum resources that they have provided, but also using knowledge of their students. We will also be expanding our K coaching pilot. We have hired an additional early literacy kindergarten academic content liaison who will be supporting 11 Title I schools. The selection process, we started out with 24 schools that have had kind of year over year either stagnant DIBELS composite scores or that have shown declines from BOI to EOI, and kind of cross-reference those schools with schools that did not have additional literacy partnerships. So these kind of narrowing down to schools that didn't have reading partners or literacy lab, didn't have a Blueprint ILS coach. And the early literacy ACL will be kind of elevating and scaling up some of the coaching that we did with CLN3 and with our K pilot to these 11 schools. So again, just another approach to where we are focusing on supporting and building teachers' skill and content knowledge, but also giving them that targeted coaching, which is something that we heard in a lot of the schools that we highlighted that are showing growth over the last few years. We'll also be introducing to our first and second grade teachers this year, really excited about this, with our partnership with Wit and Wisdom in both Wilson Reading. Wilson Reading produces Foundations, so both of our curriculum partners. This year we'll be rolling out a set of readables, so they're 80% decodables, readables that really bridge the skills that students and teachers are working on in Foundations with the content knowledge that they're building in Wit and Wisdom. So that'll be another resource that will be made available to our first and second grade teachers this year. The kindergarten version will be rolled out next summer, but it's really going to be a resource for teachers to bridge that skills and knowledge approach that we know research tells us are important, to ensure that they are aligning both Foundations and their Wit and Wisdom So that will be supported by professional learning as well as coaching. And then we will probably address this at BOY, but Amplify, our provider for DIBELS, is transitioning to DIBELS 8th edition. And in your appendix, you have access to some of the changes that DIBELS 8th will bring. And a lot of the changes are definitely for the better. They will help reduce the assessment time for Amplify at each assessment window. And they will also provide for more consistency across submeasures that are assessed across administration windows. So our comparison from window to window will be a little bit more efficient and more effective, and a really true story of what teachers are supporting students on with and students' needs between administration to administration. So those are a couple of some of the changes to be looking forward to next year, but also centered around how we're supporting teachers and leaders through both curriculum, building content knowledge through professional learning, and also curriculum materials and resources.
And just to close up the, apologies, just to wrap up the ELA side, as mentioned earlier, this year with the implementation of the Wit and Wisdom curriculum, embedded within Wit and Wisdom are new reads and end of modules. So these are common formative assessments and checkpoints throughout the year for teachers to use to gauge whether their students are mastering particular standards. Here is a screenshot of the data view that teachers as well as school leaders have access to at the end of an end of module assessment. This example here is for our grade 4 students. So this is only representing a little below 50% of students' data being entered, but from here we can gather what percent of our students are scoring at proficient. We also are able to look at specific standards level analyses so that we can target what follow-ups and supports need to happen in the classroom as well as across the school. And then we can also take a deep dive into the actual test item and see how students scored in each of these test items to, again, support any of like the reteaching or additional supports regarding standards mastery, all again in support of the implementation of this new curriculum.
And as we go into year 2 with Wit and Wisdom, as it pertains to our curriculum embedded assessments, such as the end of module assessment that Heather just spoke about, one of our areas of focus this year is really supporting schools with their instructional pacing to ensure that we're increasing our entry rate so that we can have accurate data around student performance. And then also in terms of our professional learning supports this year, we have a couple of different trajectories for teachers based on whether this is their second year implementing Wit and Wisdom versus their first year. So there are some differentiated learning paths that teachers can opt into that started this summer, and that will continue all throughout the year. And our overall focus for professional learning this year, which will support student performance on the end of modules, is really having a strong focus on writing within Wit and Wisdom so that all of our leaders, all of our teachers will go a little bit deeper with how writing presents itself and how the reading standards present themselves to student performance in writing this year for our second year of implementation.
Before we move on to math, should we take any questions right now on ELA or should we wait till the end?
I have one. So on writing, what you just were talking about. So this is a focus on students writing, perhaps about what they're reading, but you linking the reading and the writing. Is that right?
Correct, yes. So all of our assessments within Wit and Wisdom, there are 3 different assessments that that students are demonstrating their attainment of their reading skills through writing. So they're all writing about their knowledge connected to the different texts and artwork for a topic. So teachers they'll have some support around like the process writing, so the actual technical aspects, but then also supporting students in expressing and communicating the knowledge that they're building through the curriculum in a written performance.
Thank you.
With the DIBELS K-12 in the year, on slide 10, there's also a significant gap with students with disabilities. And can you all speak to what we're doing to kind of remedy that gap?
Sure. So DIBELS is a diagnostic assessment, so when students are given the DIBELS or the TRC components, it's without their accommodations or modifications. And this year, we are also turning on a feature to DIBELS is their dyslexia screener. So we are currently working with some of our partners in the community that are dyslexia advocates, as well as our related service provider and our specialized learning and special education colleagues, to come together to ensure that we have supportive guidance for teachers around how we administer the dyslexia screener, and then some next steps for supporting. So that's kind of like one way of how the assessment is changing, but also will hopefully help us give us another layer of data around students so that we can provide the appropriate instructional interventions to support them. And then the other way is with our district focus on K2 now, so not necessarily shifting away from just the 3 to 8 or the 3 to 11 tested grades, really partnering with our colleagues in specialized learning and special education to ensure that we're supporting all teachers, not just our special educators, around providing the appropriate interventions, early interventions and support for all of our students, so that we're hopefully catching this in those early grades, and that will have some impact theoretically, and we're optimistic and hopeful that down the road in this early intervention and early prevention, and the number of students that are being identified as receiving IEP services. But for DIBELS, it is a diagnostic, so one of the gaps might be because it's students performing this assessment without any accommodations, any of their IEP accommodations or modifications.
Okay, great. So on the math, our interim assessment that we administered for our second year is ANet. Again, it assesses the mastery of grade level standards. It's aligned with our Eureka curriculum. What we will be presenting is our Windows 1 through 4 average percent corrects, looking at school year 17-18 to school year 18-19. So now we have 2 years worth of data, and we can look at growth from last year into this year. Across our elementary and middle grades, we're seeing a greater percent correct in the majority of the grades on ANet than this same time last year. And we also surpassed the national comparison for those other schools and school districts that are utilizing the Eureka curriculum as well when it goes to looking at grades 2 to 8. Among our high school grades, we found that in ANet Algebra 1 and Geometry, the percent correct are relatively flat from last year versus this year. Beth will share more specifics around some of the programs that we are implementing this year related to algebra and algebra access in our middle grades that will support our students in the high schools moving forward. So here is a look at the district's performance year over year compared to the national network comparison. Again, this is looking at those other schools that are implementing the same curriculum, math curriculum as we are. Overall, what we see when we just look at city schools' performance from 17-18, that's the dark gray, to the orange, the 18-19, is that we are increasing in the average percent correct from last year to this year. And we also see that we're surpassing the national comparison, and we in particular grades and are almost close to performing at the national comparison level as a district overall. Excuse me. When we take a look at our average performance, now this is looking at grades 1 through our high schools. Here you can again see the comparison from how we performed last year to how we performed this year across ANet 1 through ANet 4. In our earlier grades, you see larger gains in grades 2, in grades 3, and in grades 4 and 5 in particular on the machine scored tested items. And then in our middle grades up into our high schools, there is some movement upwards, but also relatively flat overall. As I mentioned just in the previous slide, the data that we were presenting is just our students' performance on the machine scored or on the multiple choice items. We do also take a look at how our students performed on the machine scored versus the open response items, which are items that are scored from by our teachers. In this school year, our second year of adopting ANet, we've taken additional time to spend with teachers and norming them on the open response items. And so that's partially why you see such a variance between how our students perform on the open response, that's the orange, on the machine scored items, that's the orange bar, compared to the teacher scored, which is the darker rust, the rust color.
May I ask a quick question on
Sure.
that before you go on? I'm making an assumption, I realize, in my head, and I want to check it. So with it, if it's machine scored versus teacher scored, I'm thinking that it may be less open-ended, less discussion, so maybe, easier may be the wrong word, but somewhat simpler, I don't know, is it?
Yes, so the machine scored items are items that are one, like a word or multiple choice, and also like select, where students can like drag and drop things, so maybe you have to put it in order if it's a pattern, things like that, whereas the teacher scored items are the constructor response where they have to explain and reason. So a lot of the application, bringing that conceptual component of the math together with application where students have to bring knowledge without it being stated, to gain all the points that they need in order to hit success. So that's where Heather mentioned that we're norming teachers. We really worked with teachers over the last 2 years on really that explanation and reasoning, and how we're working with students in classrooms for the discourse to help them support the explanation and reasoning, and then also norming how teachers are scoring those so that our expectations are clear and consistent across the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just to add to that too, when we were unpacking our PARC results from school year 17-18, we also saw a difference in the performance of students on more of the multiple choice items versus the open response, which is what led to further deep dive and support around teachers in the scoring of open response, but also identifying that that is an area, the open response items is an area of improvement for our students in being able to explain their thinking and their logic in our formative assessments to then help inform the work that we need to do around our PARC performance.
Can I ask one thing? Yeah. That pattern that we are showing, how unique is that, or is that similar in other systems that you've been looking at, we're compared to?
So when we speak for PARC assessment across the consortium, the explanation and reasoning, which we call the subclaim C and D on the PARC exam, is always lower across the state's scores. So it's something that's consistent across. That is something that I know other LEAs, when working with them, are all focusing in on how we're like supporting students on that explanation and reasoning. And also some of those tasks are not just content from specific grades, it also can bring content in from prior grades. So it's really working with teachers to identify like what are those standards that may come up again, and how are you supporting students in that knowledge skill from year 1 to 2 to 3, because that's building each year. And they can also, they call it the securely held knowledge, where students have to bring knowledge from prior years into tasks, which is not something that you can really foresee as you're teaching.
And here's a look at how our district performs overall when we break it out by particular student groups. Again, overall, we were near 40% average correct on the A1 through 4 in school year 18-19. When we break it out by race and ethnicity, as we shared with our DIBELS data, the trend in terms of our white population outperforming those of our Black or Latinx population holds true on our math side as well. With students with disabilities, our general education population outperforms that of students with disabilities by about 10 points. And then with our English learners, the gap is a bit smaller by 5 points between our non-EL and our EL. And we are also taking a look at how our gifted and advanced learners are performing on our ANet compared to the non-gifted and advanced. And so we see strong performance of the gifted students with nearly 60% or above 60% average correct on A1 through 4.
Can we disaggregate that gifted data by race?
Yes,
Can we do that? I would like to see that.
sure. Now with, again, with 2 years' worth of data, we want to call out those schools at the elementary and middle school level that are showing 15-point gains from school year 17-18 to 18-19. And so we're highlighting a handful of our schools there that they are moving in increasing the average percent correct from last year to this year. And then also, when we take a look at our high schools, there are several of our high schools that are showing an increase in performance as well. And this is attributed to, again, specific targeted coaching as well as specific targeted placement of teachers within subject areas and their comfort in teaching that content area. I'm gonna talk about virtual algebra.
Sure. So this slide is just an overview of the virtual algebra versus the in-class algebra. So in the past, we've discussed virtual algebra. It's a grant called Engineers of the Future, where students that are attending schools that do not offer Algebra 1 in middle school can apply for this opportunity to come engage in the summer, where we do math intervention and acceleration as well as STEM connections and enrichment throughout the summer. Students that are rising 8th graders, since they didn't have the opportunity to be in advanced math in their middle schools, we do the 8th grade curriculum. So in the summer, that cohort of students across schools that do not offer Algebra 1 have the opportunity to take 8th grade math during the summer, and then during the school year, they engage in virtual algebra. So if you see from last year to this year, not last year to this year, from our virtual algebra to our in-class algebra, we are pretty consistent with our performance, which I feel is a huge applause to the program, because these are students that have not been in schools, that have been getting the advanced math. So this is a lot of the work that we did with students throughout the summer to prepare them for this advanced programming so that they can take more advanced classes when they get to high school. And then you can also see the outperformance of the in-class Algebra 1 across all grades, which that would include our 9th graders also. So this program, as a quick overview, I know we've talked about this in detail before. This program will be ending at the end of the school year. It'll be the end of our 3-year grant. We are proposing a scaling grant with iTest and NSF that we hope to receive, that we can continue this program for another 3 years, which will be in the works here in the near future. Going back to the slides that Heather shared with you, one of the things we really worked with school leaders this year, and then moving into like the summer and next school year, is really thinking about how are we supporting students' needs based on data. So looking at those student groups and identifying based off of where they're at and how can we support them. So what are we doing around those foundational skills to support students that need that prior to that first teach? Also, re-engagement strategies. So when we see that students are struggling with the mastery of standards, how are we supporting them? So we've been looking a lot at digging into the data with the principals and the school leaders, looking at data through not just the content, but also through the different student populations to see if there's ways that we can support within the school, different subgroups, so that we can help close those gaps. We also spend a lot of time last year going through our data cycle around progress monitoring. So we have our ANet cycle that we go through with teachers, so everybody's on the same page around really like how are we assessing and how are we utilizing that data to make informed decisions ongoing in our classroom. But then also thinking about those small groups and then analyzing growth across assessments. So as students are performing better, are we making sure that we're moving on to other content and filling up more gaps? So that is some of the work we started in CAO Institute, again, this year with principals on identifying how are we really looking at this data through different lenses in order to make those decisions for students. This slide is going through, looking at the data with the lens of the content. So here is just a snapshot of grade 6-8, as you can see, looking at it through the domain. So at some levels, we want to look at the domain, and then we go in all the way down to the standard level. So when teachers are creating their action plans quarterly, they're focusing in on what specific standards did my students master and not master so that they can identify small groups. A lot of the work that we do is looking somewhat at the domain and the cluster level so we can make informed decisions around the district of what we're doing like around professional learning opportunities for teachers, how are those making a difference, and are we seeing growth across student achievement based off the coaching and based off the supports that we're giving to schools. So for example,
I'm sorry, you
Oh, that's
said
okay.
teachers they're doing that quarterly? They're going back to address standards-based skill needs every quarter?
yes,
And
so
not throughout the
they're doing it
quarters?
throughout also, but the ANet data is quarterly. So they're doing a larger cycle around the ANet data, and then they do smaller cycles around their mid-module and end-of-module assessments, and then daily formative assessments like their exit tickets. And with this data here, if you look at the ratio and proportional relationship in grade 6, this year we're at 34%. Last year, our students that were in 6th grade were at 32%. So we're seeing some small growth across different domains, but really trying to look at that data and make informed decisions on how we're determining what professional learning opportunities we're giving to teachers and our school leaders. And this slide is going into, I know the question was asked around the explanation and reasoning. So we dig a lot into this because we know this is really where our students struggle the most, is explaining their math and reasoning with the mathematics. So supporting teachers around their content knowledge and also supporting our students into having the opportunity to grapple with the content around the explanation and reasoning. So these are the aspects of rigor. When you look at the conceptual, procedural, and application, that's when it's built together, and a lot of those are our teacher-scored items, those constructed response items that we've been really digging in to with the school leaders and the teachers, and they are also working on looking at student work and making decisions a lot during their academic planning sessions. Lastly, when we're looking at supporting teachers, so we do a lot of looking at our data and making these decisions, but now we want to look at teachers and how are we supporting them based off what data they're producing. So a lot of times we have a lot of PD and we have a lot of different offerings, and teachers are sort of making the decision based off of maybe what they want to learn and what they need, which is great. But we also want to be strategic about looking at that data and deciding what exactly is it that I need as a professional in order to grow and support my students. So we started that work this year with looking at our data in different ways with the school leaders. So this summer they're creating action plans for teachers to determine what professional learning opportunities are we going to give them throughout the year in order to support the learning that they need. And some of that you can see, I can go through quickly because I know we're beyond time. Is like the chart that they're doing, and they're working on this throughout the summer to make individualized plans for each teacher, as well as focusing in on the action steps that a teacher needs and making sure we're making alignment to what the students that they're going to be teaching again this year will need. The other piece is the professional learning opportunities. So when we look at some of that data, making the determination of like how are we going to support teachers around professional learning opportunities as systemic PD, and then also at our NAP opportunities. So that's our virtual supports that we give information to teachers at specific grade levels each week. Everything from last year will still be there, so teachers will have the opportunity to go through pathways this year where they can engage in the pathway, and then we're going to try to give them some recognition at the end if they've completed their year-long studies. So they're going to determine based off their data what study and what paths they need, and then at the end of the year, we are going to give them some type of certificate or something just to acknowledge that they are, performing in their professional responsibilities and also growing as professionals and leaders. So our next steps, we are still developing resources with ELA and special ed to support our students. So in our curriculum embedded, there are resources to support EL and our special ed students, which also help all of our students in our classroom, but we want to go a little deeper in that and really give specific support. So some of them are vague in a sense. So we are building out some supports with some teachers we can support all classrooms. We're also working with a group of teachers to develop a teacher toolbox, which is what teachers, based off their feedback in some of our sessions with teachers, have asked for, more resources that we'll also see if you back map into our NAP resources. We have also done some of that with what we're going to be providing for teachers based off the feedback that they've shared with us. And that also, the other next step is around the development, a trajectory of learning. So we want teachers to be part of like a year-long study, so not just one-offs, but like how am I learning throughout, so I can really focus in on an area of need. So looking at those trajectories and really building those out for our teachers and school leaders. This summer, we had a great institute. I have not found a teacher that was not satisfied at this point. For Eureka, we had some of the Eureka specialists come in and work with our teachers in June, and they really leveraged what those word problems are in the story of the units across, and the teachers really gave a lot of good feedback on that and are really excited about what they learned. So I'm excited to see how we can continue that excitement through the school year. And when we get to our continuous professional learning, going through those data cycles and also working closely with leaders this year to really give teachers quality feedback when we're in classrooms. So really supporting them and monitoring and supporting through that feedback to help grow our teachers to support our students.
So just to close 1 minute on this, the CEIS schools are the Coordinated Early Intervention Services schools. When we were at the start of the school year, our iReady Oh, thank you, sorry. Students with disabilities compared to general education students. iReady was utilized as a universal screener at the beginning of the year for the CEIS schools to identify those specific general education students in need of interventions from an academic as well as a social emotional perspective to address student individualized needs, thus addressing factors that might lead to disciplinary actions. As iReady is a growth assessment, it allows us to see where a student is performing at the beginning of the year or what grade level they're performing at the beginning of the year, and then tracking as to how much growth they've exhibited by the end of the year. The CEIS schools were required to administer 3 times a year in order to progress monitor these students that were identified in their efforts to move students towards grade level proficiency, with the idea of if we can target around what the social emotional needs are of those students and thus improve the disproportionality or reduce the disproportionality between special education and general education students, we should and also expect to see an improvement in the overall academic outcomes of those students. Hence the focus on iReady as a assessment to measure how these students are performing within the school year. And so here's just an example calling out those schools that were identified as CEIS and showing what percent or being able to show what percent of their students improved a placement level. So for example, they placed at a 4th grade level in 6th grade, and what percent of them were able to at least improve 1 placement level. So growing more than 1 year's worth of growth. And Edgecombe Circle Elementary School, for example, by the end of the year showed that 55.6% of their students improved more than 1 year's worth. They still have 15.3% of their students on or above grade level, but what the data, once you unpack it further at that school level, the data is able to show at what level students are able to access their grade level curriculum and identify the appropriate interventions and supports for those students so that we can gain momentum and move those students into the on or above grade level area. And that is it for the EOI.
And it is a lot of information to take in.
Yes, it is.
So we may come back individually with questions for
Okay.
you later.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions now? Yeah, oh, and we will study the appendix.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I'm trying to study right there.
With the iReady, we're using iReady as an assessment, right? But we're also using it as an intervention tool? Are we doing that?
iReady is an assessment. It's a growth assessment. The curriculum associates within the assessment platform has a list of provides tools and supports for teachers related to interventions that they can give to their students once they've identified that those students are performing either 1 grade level or 2 grade levels below. So there is a package.
In addition to that, as a part of the Curriculum Associates suites of materials, they also have other instructional materials and supports that are available, and they also provide professional development and coaching support. So one of the things that was identified early on was while having an assessment can get you started, it doesn't help solve the problem of what do you actually do once you understand where a student's performance level is placed. So the whole idea is their suite gives you some of that information pre-built, but there are supplemental resources that schools, and in some cases the district, has invested in order to support the intervention needs of students identified.
Good. So we've invested in the supplemental resources for schools to use, or schools can opt to purchase them?
Correct. So it's sort of a mixed approach. So what we've done is we've made those supports available to schools. We haven't had the resources to be able to supply them wholesale for all schools. So schools have essentially sort of opted in and made those incremental investments as they've continued to see the value of leveraging the iReady data. In addition to that, for the CEIS schools, there was an investment made around sort of the coaching supports to be able to get a more intensive treatment, if you will, in those schools to see to what extent does that actually improve and accelerate the growth. So what I would say is, while it's still very early on, it's at least promising to indicate that when we have those resources in the school, we have sort of a coach there that's working alongside the school folks to be able to build capacity. It actually enhances their ability to make better use of the data. And then by having those other supports in place, they can actually implement the instructional decisions that they need to more immediately while we work through that. So one of the things that you will see, I hate to be a little spoiler alert here, when we get into the assessment strategy is that there is still a district need to really be thinking through what is our intervention strategy across the board. And this board has talked extensively about what is our plan around accelerating student performance when we've indicated time and time again that we have such a large percentage of our students performing below grade level. That is an ongoing need. And we're continuing to make progress, but we're not completely there yet. So we'll talk a little bit about that as being one of the critical next steps as we move forward with the next version of the assessment strategy.
Thanks.
So speaking of assessment strategy, I think we are now transitioning.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So as Jessica Wilson comes forth, I'm just going to say just a couple quick things to get us started here. So at the table, you have Jessica Wilson from our academics office and Heather Nolan, once again, from the Office of Achievement and Accountability. And I just want to acknowledge up front that these two ladies have taken on a tremendous lift in trying to collaborate across offices, taking stakeholder feedback into consideration, the whole 9 yards, to be able to continue to help evolve the district's assessment strategy. So what they're going to share with you today is what I'll still continue to call a work in progress, because we're continuing to learn about what's working, what's not working, and how can we get better about it. But you will see evidence here of where our learning is starting to pay off around some of the decisions that we're making as we look forward to 1920. So with that, ladies, the floor is yours.
Hello again.
Hello.
So we, again, Heather Nolan, Director of Knowledge Management in OAA.
Jessica Wilson, Director of Academic Operations.
So before we start down the path of assessments and see the list of assessments, we want to start first giving an overview of all the different, of the types of assessments that schools and students have to gain information about how our students are learning. And so when we take a look at this slide, assessments refer to a variety of methods in which we can, as educators, evaluate, measure, document, either academic readiness, what the learning progress has been, but also skill acquisition of all of our students. And we first start that off with our diagnostic. Our diagnostic is like a precursor assessment just to say, how much information do you know offhand before we start dosing you with new instruction, right? So we assess our students around, or you can assess students using a diagnostic. There are then the formative assessments, and these are assessments identified as like assessments for learning. They're giving you detailed information about what your students are learning while you're actually teaching them. So we hear a lot about teachers doing checkpoints during the classroom. That's really what a formative assessment is. You deliver a content and then you check with them by the end of that day or the end of the lesson whether they got that content or not. That's an example of formative. Then we have the interim assessment. The interim assessment is periodic. And it's meant to measure how much a student has learned over the course of time within that year. And it's administered separate from the process of instructing. So this is where the teacher pauses from instructing and then actually sits the students down, gives them a test, collects that data, and then analyzes that to determine what they should be doing in the classroom next. And then finally, you have your summative. Your summative is administered once a year, so it's at the culmination of something at the end of the year, or at times at the middle of the year, but it is the culmination. And it's evaluating your student learning, your skill acquisition, and your academic achievement based on a defined instructional period. So there's value and purpose into each of these types of assessments, and is what Teresa was mentioning in our conversations with schools, in our conversations with district office staff that are connected to the content work as well as the support work. It's how do we see all of these assessments and which of these assessments are we prioritizing to support what we're learning about our students, and then how we are supporting them moving forward based on the data that we have.
We have a
Yeah, I
question.
had a question, thank you.
Yes.
The diagnostic is so critical, we know that. And at some point, you're talking about from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, this whole process occurs. At some point, do you find that it's necessary to give another diagnostic, actually, between the formative and the interim to determine where the students are, because you continue through the whole year and you're not sure exactly what they have learned and what you need to review, or do you find that it's necessary, or do you think it's a good idea to do that?
What you've just spoken to is the value of using something like an iReady. iReady is a diagnostic, and what it does is it essentially will give you an indication of what the placement level is based on the point in time in which you're giving the assessment. So while we talk about it being mandatory for the beginning of the year, that's why we've actually made it optional for the middle of the year and the end of year, so that in that case, schools can make decisions to say, all right, now that I know that this student was at X placement level, I want to check in to see, are they growing over the course of the year? So it just sort of speaks to the benefit of having sort of a suite of assessments that complement one another to understand what's happening. And quite honestly, that's the biggest challenge, is because there's a lot of information that people want to gather, but we want to be sensitive to the amount of time that it takes, how the data are being used to make sure that people actually understand proper use of the data, and that people are actually making the meaningful decisions that we intend for them to make around it. So I appreciate you bringing that question to the forefront. It has been one of our biggest challenges around how do we balance out this suite, and that is actually one of the reasons that we've made some decisions to make certain assessments optional to provide the flexibility to do that.
And I just want to add something else to that. You also can do an assessment of how well the teacher in the classroom is doing working with the students, because if certain issues the students aren't learning, or somewhere in the middle, they aren't getting it, it would seem that we might have to work with the teacher, do some professional development, and we can address that immediately, so you might consider that, okay.
May I just want to thank you for this slide. No, really, and I do hope that this can show up in other places, especially in terms of with the community and with parents, in understanding what assessment is and the types of assessment, because I do think folks tend to think that we're just testing for the sake of testing, and there's some very distinct reasons for that. So I think this was one of
Thank
the
you.
best that I've seen in terms of putting it all into one place. So thank you.
And hopefully what it
I
shows
agree.
is not all tests are created equal, right? So to your point about wouldn't you want to see how much a student has grown in the middle of the year to the end of year after the diagnostic, that requires a particular type of assessment that is able to measure growth across the year. Some interims don't do that. The interims are just about a point in time. I taught these standards within these 4 to 6 weeks, and I'm just assessing whether you were proficient on those specific standards within that shortened time period. And so that's an example where that interim and assessing on the standard is about mastery of those standards, whereas other assessments are built to measure the progress or measure growth. So there's different types of measurements when you think about the assessment that you're putting in place and what information you're able to glean from it. So when we went down the road to revisit and reflect on last year's assessment strategy and this year's assessment strategy, what we kept going back to is that there are some critical building blocks for how we think about the district's assessment strategy. The first, and at the bottom, the big fat base, is around the accountability, and this is really mandated from the federal and state around their requirements in the ESSA. And then from there, the district is thinking strategically about what are those key assessments that can be used to inform instructional decisions, that can be used to identify the correct interventions for students, that can be used to identify students for either disability supports or EL support, English learner supports, or identify students to be placed into gifted and advanced learning, or to be placed for choice processes as the district. And then there's other uses that the district needs an assessment to provide, from an evaluation standpoint about evaluating how well our programs are, to evaluating staff as part of our staff evaluation process at the school level.
And really quickly here, I would just also add that one of the things that we've kept as a priority is continuing to what I'll call milk, if you will, those assessments that fall in that bottom building block, because one of the things that we want to be mindful of is avoiding duplicativeness and redundancy when it comes to the assessment, but we also need to understand sort of the merits of using the assessment data in certain ways so that we can make sure that the decisions that are being made are appropriate, and that the assessment data are working alongside, in many cases, other data to help inform those decisions.
So we identified this, the following slide here, or the content of the slides, as our organizing principle or our theory of action when we thought about our assessment. So we believed first starting at the students. So if our students have access to grade level content and they're actually completing the assessments that identify what they know and then need to know to be to be on track for college and career readiness, then teachers will have assessment data or information that can help support building of routines, ensuring the timely and appropriate interventions are applied to students, are communicating important information to students and families about how the student is progressing, and that they're developing concrete plans of actions to ensure students are learning and thriving. And then school and district leaders also have that data to then inform what our professional learning for teachers and school leaders are, as you heard Beth in the prior presentation here, talk about how she uses that data to inform professional learning that we offer to our teachers and school leaders. And it also helps inform school and district staff and leadership in allocating resources and supports to better support the staff, students, and families within our district. So with that said, as an orientation again, our school year 18-19 district assessment strategy. So the top row there shows you what the state required as a mandate. So again, these are seen as your summative assessments from K2 with the KRA administered just for kindergarten. For grades 3 to 5, Park, MISA is the science, and then the MSAA and the Alt-MISA are for our students with disabilities. The same is true for 6 to 8, but with MISA just administered to our grade 8 students. And then at our high school level, high school students by content areas are given Park, our MISA for grade 10, the government HSA, and then the MSAA and Alt-MISA for students with disabilities, and then the SAT and AccuPlacer. So while it seems like a lot, it is, some of these are targeted for specific students and specific grade levels or content areas.
Really quickly, I'll just interject just to clarify the SAT and AccuPlacer references. The state doesn't require the SAT per se, but what it does require is to have a college and career readiness assessment to confirm that that has happened. And so our district decision has been to use the SAT assessment for that purpose. So that is why that is noted there. So I just want to clarify that, particularly for the public.
Thank you.
That's also why we pay to have our students take that exam.
It's one of many reasons that we offer a school day SAT, because there are numerous benefits to having kids have that exposure and making that readily available. One of them is that it does kind of serve that double purpose, so that for those students that are in these particular courses, it allows them not to have to take yet another assessment while they're also getting that experience of having the SAT. And then in some cases, they're able to actually score well enough that that'll support their interest in colleges. So it is one of the things, again, back to the spirit of sort of milking the assessments that we have, where we've been able to sort of make that particular adjustment.
Do we use PSAT and SAT data to inform any type of preparation instruction for those exams?
You know, that's a great question. I can't speak specifically to how the PSAT data are being used. I know that there are a number of schools that have looked at using it in numerous ways. I know some of them are using the Khan Academy resources that are a part of that, so it sort of enhances their ability for the PSAT experience to better prepare them for their SAT experience. And I think others have been using it in other ways. I don't know, Jess, if you want to speak to that.
We can certainly check with all the content areas and see if there's a specific example. We do know that the data is available for schools. We're not sure or at least I'm not sure exactly how they're using it at this time.
Thanks.
Even for the SAT, the AccuPlacer, that's not state mandated. Go ahead.
No, I'm going to let you finish your question.
Oh, because I was going to ask this before you made a statement about SAT and AccuPlacer, because we all know that they're going to end up having to take an AccuPlacer somewhere. So why can't it be mandated?
So we're going to talk a little bit about that, because there is a transition coming in terms of the AccuPlacer piece. So again, this is sort of the 18-19 recap.
Okay.
We're going to talk about one of the changes around AccuPlacer and how that affects what we're going to be doing for
Because
19-20.
we know
But that was
yeah.
one of the reasons, going back to this idea of having to have assessments that could then be used to meet that requirement.
Right.
There were agreements that were made, particularly with the local community colleges and with the state, to be able to ensure that the AccuPlacer score that would be identified for the college and career readiness could also then meet the entrance requirements for certain community colleges. So there was an intentionality to try to align those things. That's shifting in this next year because of some changes in the assessment itself. So you're not going to see AccuPlacer on this picture for next year, because now there's a different agreement in place, particularly with BCCC, for what we'll be using to satisfy that requirement.
Okay.
So again, it was just simply, the intent here for this particular box was to be able to indicate that the state had identified certain college and career readiness assessments that could be used to satisfy those requirements
Okay.
that we were going to be using as a part of our district strategy.
Thank you.
then in looking at what the district in 1819 mandated across our ELA strand, as we presented just a few minutes ago for K2 was Amplify DIBELS TRC as our foundational literacy progress measure, Wit and Wisdom as part of the curriculum implementation. For grades 3 to 5, iReady BOY, with the option for MOY and EOY, and then also the use of Wit and Wisdom, new reads and end of modules. The same for grades 6 to 8, and then at the high school level, requiring BOY for iReady in grades 9 through 11. On the district mandated for math. For the early grades, we used iReady as the diagnostic for grades 1 and 2. In grades 3 to 5, they also administered the iReady again as that diagnostic, and then implemented the interim ANet assessments for 3 to 5 in grades 6 to 8. And then at the high school level, again, administered iReady, BOY, and then with the ANet interims administered for Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. For the non-ELA math subject areas that we wanted to highlight, we did implement interims, and we plan to fully implement a set of interims in social studies, science, world language, and fine arts by school year 2021. And then for our high schools, we fully implemented interims for social studies and science, as well as world language and fine arts. And those allow us to progress monitor how our students are performing on the content that is being taught in those subject areas.
So the questions, upcoming school year is going to be the first time of doing the social studies and science interims?
For middle school.
The 1920 school year will be the first time that we have interims for all 4 core and world language at the high school level. Some middle school content areas will have those in place for next school year, but they will be fully implemented for school year 2021.
Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that, yep. So look back at what we presented to the board last August regarding our 3-year assessment strategy, knowing that we are continuing to review and also evolve and reflect on past practice and current practice as well. So when we think about, again, what are the assessments that we are using to measure mastery of students towards the standards? In school year 18-19, we identified math ANet, but we had also called out and proposed that we would be implementing an ELA interim assessment added to the second quarter. We just wanted to give an update again here that after meeting with principals and content offices around the implementation of the new curriculum and the formative assessments, so that Wit and Wisdom end of module as an example that were already embedded in the new curriculum, we wanted to make sure we weren't adding duplicative assessments if we were to administer Wit and Wisdom and also an ELA interim. And so we wanted to just, we went with the decision of just implementing the Wit and Wisdom end of module assessments to then determine whether those formative assessments are giving us the information we need. Again, not to duplicate, and in the words of Teresa, to milk the information as much as possible towards understanding where our students are in mastering the standards and what supports we need to provide for them. And so that was the update that we had made in school year 18-19 by not going with an interim assessment in the second quarter as we had originally identified. And so as a result of that, in school year 19-20, we had also called out the ELA interim assessment as well as in 2021, and we'll go into the details of what this upcoming school year's assessment strategy is.
So now that Heather's kind of laid the baseline for what we did last year, let's talk a little bit about the changes that are coming for school year 19-20. So for the math interims, we've had a lot of feedback from the field that's going well, and it's giving them the type of data that they need, and so we're not proposing any changes. We're going to continue with the ANet interims for math. For the ELA interims, as Heather said, we're continuing to evaluate whether or not we need to add on additional checkpoints for the district and for teachers and principals around student mastery in the ELA. We're gonna be working again this year to see kind of where we're at with that and continuing to explore options to potentially add that interim if, given where we're at in the curriculum implementation and what we're hearing back from the schools, leads us in the direction that that's definitely where we're gonna go. So we're not gonna be implementing an interim in the coming school year, but it is something that we're gonna continue to look at and explore moving forward. For iReady, we had originally indicated that this year would be totally optional. One of the things that we learned as we've gone through this process is that diagnostic piece is very important, and so we're maintaining the requirements for last year. So the beginning of year assessment for iReady will be required again for all students. The high school adjustments, the big news there is the transition to interim assessments. This means that instead of experiencing midterms and final exams in the core content areas, they will be having kind of quarterly interims in the 4 core subject areas that will be standardized. There'll be something that teachers can talk about and share data with and use for planning purposes as well. The curriculum embedded writing that's part of our ELA curriculum will continue as is, no change there. For AccuPlacer, there was a policy change for AccuPlacer themselves where they decided they were no longer going to be sharing student information, test scores and results with local jurisdictions, which meant that while our students can take AccuPlacer and it can be used for a variety of things at the college level, it was no longer going to meet our requirements for that college and career readiness piece of the puzzle for the state legislation. And so we went back and we looked at what were some of the other options that we could utilize in order to meet those requirements that would both satisfy the law and actually be useful for our students. And so we're working through, we have a tentative agreement and we're finalizing the MOU with BCCC where the students will participate in those same college and career readiness courses here at the district. They will take effectively the midterms and finals for the courses that they would have taken at BCCC. And if they are successful here with us, that BCCC will enroll them in credit-bearing courses in the following year. So that's kind of what we're working through there on that. So
just a short, I'm not understanding that.
So in lieu of AccuPlacer as the test or exam that students are taking in order to prove their college and career readiness in order to enroll in courses at BCCC, we're going to be administering the tests here for the BCCC courses. And so if they're successful in taking the exams with us and they pass, BCCC will basically accept that as saying you have completed the prerequisites to be enrolled in a credit-bearing course.
Makes sense. Will they have to pay for that?
No.
Oh, good. So they don't pay for it right now?
So if they're doing dual enrollment,
Yeah, okay.
then they're not paying for it. In this particular instance, what this is doing is basically allowing the school district to offer them this opportunity where if they're successful, whatever they do end up paying for when they enroll in the following year would be credit-bearing.
That makes all the sense. Thank you.
I have one question, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I got confused too. How does that align with what you just said about the high school, about the adjustment of the high school assessments to
interims?
yes.
So we're still working through what that looks like because this is something we've been working with over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
The students are enrolled in courses that are specific for this purpose, and so
Okay.
the assessments will align with that course,
Okay.
which we will be continuing to work through. It may, right now, we're showing it as kind of like a midterm and final, but it is very likely that it'll be broken down similar to how the interims are broken down for other courses.
Okay.
So this slide is just summarizing the changes. So you can see again a similar view of what it was like in 1819, and this is what it'll be like for our students and staff in 1920. Again, we just talked through the summary and the changes. The one thing to highlight here again, which Teresa pointed out earlier, is that in that high school column, we're not showing AccuPlacer or SAT as state mandated, even though we are using those assessments to meet those requirements, and we're offering them to students in school day SAT.
Really quickly, I'll also just mention, for those of you that had not taken a peek at the appendix, because when you take a look at this, it truly is acronym soup. The appendix does give you descriptions, just high-level descriptions around what each of these assessments is for, which content area, which grades, et cetera. So I would also just encourage people to take a look at that to try to make sense of what all these offerings are so that they can understand what that means by grade.
So when we think about what this assessment strategy looks like and feels like for students and staff, we take a look at the projected seat times for students. What we tried to do in this slide was really give everyone an idea of both the total hours by grade level in that first column there after the grade, and then breaking it down between the percentage of that time that is state mandated versus district mandated assessments, and then providing a list of state mandated assessments that account for that time. We're in a transition period with the state, and the transitioning from Park to MCAP does mean that there will be some lessening of seat time for that particular assessment. And so we wanted to make sure that we were kind of reflecting where that works out for all of the different grade levels. The one thing that we do need to note here when we're looking at this slide is that 10th grade has that little asterisk there, because in the More Learning, Less Testing Act, there were seat time requirements for the maximum amount of testing that a district could propose without agreement from the union to exceed those limits. 10th grade is the only grade in which we exceed that limit at this time, and we're still working through the process with the union to get formal agreement on that grade level in particular. One of the reasons that one has such a high total hours is because there are a lot of state mandated tests. So you have the social studies test and the science test in addition to the English 10 test in that year, which accounts for a large portion of that time. So the difference between 9th grade and 10th grade is largely attributable to just the difference in the state mandated assessments that happen in that grade. The other thing that is important to note here is that because we're going through that transition year, there is field testing that'll be happening. So students will be experiencing an additional section of testing as part of the MCAP. We've included that time here in the total hours, even though that's something that is not required for us to count as part of the legislation, just because we know that it is a real thing for our students and our teachers as they're going through this transition process.
The other piece here that's also important to note about testing time is the way that we've captured it here is to ensure consistency with how the other locals also report their testing time. So one of the key measures around this More Learning, Less Testing is everybody like at the state level needs to be able to understand where the differences are. So we recognize that there has always been this question around like, well, what is it really? Because there's other activities, transition time, prep time, those types of things. Those additional minutes are not captured in this current view. So that is something that we still have to figure out what's the best way to get at that, because we certainly have heard from the field that is a sore spot, that we are underestimating what the impact is at the school level. But it's challenging to do that when every school operates differently and we don't have consistent technology in all of the schools. So how one school is impacted to do all of these computer-based assessments can look very different than another. So it is something that has come up as we've convened this district committee on assessments to try to figure out what are some of the recommendations around that. So I just want to put that out there just so that we're clear up front that we don't have a clear view of that today. So what you'll see in the appendix is the view of this that just breaks it down based on that consistent seat time business rule as a way to have common comparison of across districts.
And then finally, a summary of our 3-year assessment strategy, again, broken down between that mastery and that growth category. The big things to highlight here is that, again, we have that ELA interim assessment there in that SY 2021 and beyond block, because we're going to continue to look at that this year and see if that is something that we're going to move forward on. Right now, we're planning on and preparing for that, but again, we're going to go back after the first quarter and talk to principals and teachers and figure out exactly what gap that interim would be closing for us, and from a data standpoint, what is it that they are getting, what is it that we think we're missing, and working with the school's office and school leaders as well in that procurement process, so that we're ensuring that when we are adding that ELA interim, it is not something that is being duplicative of what is already happening. The other piece of it is that, again, we are having all of the high school interims this year. Next year, we'll be seeing that at the middle school level as well, so that we will have consistent interims from 6th through 12th grade for all of our core subjects. Finally, in the growth category, one of the things that we've talked about, both in the end of year presentation as well as part of the answers to the diagnostic, is the need for that diagnostic piece and to focus in on how we're effectively using that data. And so one of the things that we're doing over the course of next school year is breaking down and working with teams on the implementation of, you can actually go to the next slide, the implementation of a district-wide intervention strategy. So for overall, what we're working on as far as next steps is to continue to work with the state for that MCAP transition, recognizing the fact that that is a change for schools and leaders, our school leaders as well. And then reviewing that implementation of wit and wisdom at the end of modules after quarter one, figuring out what it is that we are trying to achieve with both that data as well as what we might need to add, if we need to add anything, to provide the data to do all of our work. And then finally, working with their school leaders, teachers, and families, and identifying and formalizing the district-wide intervention strategies. Because right now, we know that there's a lot of good work going on in different places across the district, and we're going to be working to figure out what is the best way for us to put together and formalize that work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think now we're going into school readiness, yes? What? I know. That's why I checked. I hadn't missed. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Do you want me to hold until Commissioner
No, I
Bundina
think-
comes back?
I think we have to keep going because
Fantastic.
we're running late.
Yes. No, we are, and so I will do my very best to move through this. You all are probably pretty accustomed to seeing this presentation around this time of year every year. This presentation, hold on, let me grab the clicker. This presentation really is done in partnership, right? We have two ways in which we get ready for the school year ahead, right? We have our operational kind of readiness, and you all always receive the board gets updates on that. And then we have our sort of school readiness in terms of how we're preparing teachers and school leaders in order to face the coming school year. So this presentation focuses on the latter, and I'll try to quickly kind of just walk through the myriad of things that we've done for and with our schools over the course of the summer. So what I've tried to do, and pardon for those being in red, they shouldn't be, what I will try to do is walk through each of these. We've broken them out into the following areas: leadership development, so what are we doing really for our principals, assistant principals, teacher leaders; academics, what are we doing in literacy, mathematics, early learning, special ed, college and career readiness, you name it, we're doing it, student wholeness, and then we'll give a little bit of insight into some of the things we're doing around specific school models, so think 21st century. Our previous presentation mentioned our CEIS schools, for example, or are those SIG 4 100% project schools. In terms of leadership development, we kicked off the summer with our Leadership Institute, which happened at the end of June, and hosted principals, assistant principals, and members of their instructional leadership team. We've heard a little bit about this in both our literacy and math presentations. We were really able to take the opportunity to ground principals in foundational literacy work and connect that all the way through to college and career readiness to really show the through line between a great and early start and success at the end of a student's trajectory. In partnership with our Office of Organizational Development, Talent and Organizational Development, they hosted a series of summer leadership offerings. These were optional for school leaders, principals, teacher leaders, assistant principals, but worked across our offices to provide professional development opportunities in areas of need, right? Places where we saw through our data that school leaders could use a little support and additional development. So data-driven decision-making, understanding how to give and receive feedback, understanding students, right? So really getting to know our kids, improving relationships with family and community, leading teams, setting priorities, and working on our instructional framework. Every year, we always host new principal onboarding, as well as assistant principal work. This was led out of our leadership office, again, within the Office of Talent Talent and Organizational Development and Human Capital. And so we had our new principal onboarding in July and Assistant Principal Institute in July as well. My understanding is we had about 80 to 86%, I believe, of all of those new folks participating throughout these. So that's really exciting. Our Mentor Academy, which concluded last week, sees all of our new teacher mentors over the course of a few days in order to prepare them to see new teachers, welcome new teachers into their building, and get an initial start with the new teachers into the school year. When we take a look at academics, Ashley Cook, our director for literacy, already sort of went through some of these, so I won't really go back through them, but as you'll see, we did offer our K-8 literacy academies, the K-2 reading academy, which she had mentioned as our letters training, and content area literacy cohort development. A lot of that, as you can see, we had a few things happening at the end of the school year, right at the end of June, but most of the stuff is happening this week. So kudos to Ashley for both being here and having all those things happening in the field at the same time. In mathematics and science, you can see we're offering a variety of things. We had our Mathematics Summer Institute, which we usually always host right at the end of the school year, receives quite robust participation. Our Algebra 1 Access for All sessions, we're offering SABE's academies and IQuist for science. We have a chemistry and earth science professional development opportunity this summer, and a teaching physics for the first time to provide support to teachers in teaching physics and the pedagogy associated with that. In early learning, we're offering the Early Learning Summer Institute, which focuses on oral language and also focuses on some of the same pieces that Ms. Cook was talking about in terms of foundational literacy skills, and that was offered right at the end of July. In special education, this week we have our Special Education Institute happening. It sees principals, IEP chairs, both general and special educators, as well as related service providers. We offer this every single year and is really focusing heavily on specially designed instruction and understanding the connections between the IEP and then delivery on that IEP within the classroom. Our special ed office is also offering de-escalation training. We offered several of these throughout the course of the school year, which I believe we've reported onto the board previously. This is a continuation of that work and saw our wholeness specialists in our intensive learning sites this summer, as well as principals, assistant principals, and ed associates across those sites. Our Office of College and Career Readiness is also hosting a number of trainings, many of them focusing on ensuring that we are ready and scheduled and that our counselors are ready to welcome students into the new school year. We also always partner with MSDE through our Perkins funding to provide a variety of CTE-focused trainings for folks. This is a very brief scheduling update. I don't want to go into it too deeply here, only because it does get presented along with all the other operational pieces. I think every year we do provide it to you. You'll notice here that the last date was done on July 18th. So what we usually do is commit to you all to provide another update in mid-August to make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date figures on scheduling. Now, there were some things this year and last where we increased the rigor of what we determine as like ready and fully scheduled. And so we want to make sure that we're providing you with those figures. Some of that coming from the new ESSA regulations on what it means to have a well-rounded curriculum and ensuring that students aren't just numbers of classes that are available, but that kids are actually scheduled in the appropriate courses that meet those well-rounded requirements. So you'll receive a brief memo, which is sort of what we've done at the end of each year to make sure that you always have up-to-date figures on that. We are offering the New Teacher Summer Institute, which kicks off next week, is very exciting, and it always offers our new teachers an opportunity not only to get to know a little bit more about city schools and dive into curriculum and pedagogy, but this year, as part of the concentrations of poverty funding, we're really focusing a lot of that on the cultural context of Baltimore and trying to get our new teachers a little bit more acclimated to the student population that they're working with, the communities that they're working in. So there's a lot of really exciting work that's happening at the New Teacher Institute next week. I will also say you'll see there are The New Teacher Institute, which hosts special educators and general educators, then we always have 2 days that are very specific to special educators.
Can I make a suggestion that the board receives an invite to the New Teacher Institute?
Sure.
I think it would be nice to be able to greet our new teachers, if possible.
Of
If
course.
all of the board knew when that was prior to our later August meeting.
Oh, no problem. So that's led out of our Office of Teacher Support and Development, and I'd be happy to get in touch with Ms. Medley, who's the director there. I'm sure she'd love to have any and all of you. So thank you for that suggestion. We, of course, are also offering systemic professional development for all of our teachers when they return. As you know, our teachers come back on August 27th and have that week to really prepare in their schools for the year ahead. On August 28th, we will host a systemic day, which allows teachers to come out and really engage in foundational learning that's critical for success in the first 30 to 60 days of school. Sessions are offered through a variety of mediums, often in person, but some are done through webinar, and some are done at the schools and our school-based training more writ large. Student wholeness. So this summer, our student wholeness activities have really focused on the cohort 2 that is coming on board for intensive learning sites. And actually tomorrow, I was afraid I was going to be late for this meeting because I was over the accelerator space trying to make sure that we were all set up to receive our almost 100 participants for tomorrow's retreat for the student wholeness cohort 2, which is so very exciting there. We also have a whole school training with those folks, which happens at the end of August as their teachers are coming back. We bring everyone back one day early and then do one other day at the school, which is focused on restorative practices. But it allows us to really immerse the entire school in what it means to be an intensive learning site as they launch into the new school year. In addition to those two, we've been hosting our Student Wholeness Specialist Orientation. That's really taken place throughout the course of the entire summer. As you know, with our second cohort coming on, we had 21 new schools for which we had to hire Student Wholeness Specialists, have been incredibly successful in doing so, and are now having all of them going through the orientation, and they'll both be a part of the retreat as well as the whole school trainings. Our Office of Prevention and Intervention is also offering its restorative practices opportunities through systemic professional learning. So there are the cohort 1, if you will recall, subset of restorative practices schools, and they're still receiving development over the course of this summer. We also have a subset of schools that are sort of official PBIS schools and have been doing PBIS for some time, and we continue to provide them with support and updated information throughout the summer to ensure that they're implementing PBIS appropriately in their schools. Attendance and student conduct. So every summer, we always offer enrollment training and refresher and sort of open lab sessions to make sure that we are capturing student attendance appropriately and that we're capturing enrollment information appropriately. And this really runs through July 9th to August 23rd. We host these sort of open lab sessions to help folks ensure that we have enrollment locked down tight. We offer our summer transfer window that's just about to close on August 16th. We've provided attendance training that goes through July 9th through August 30th, right? These are things we're constantly doing with the folks in schools. Our attendance work group has been providing us valuable feedback throughout the course of the summer, actually spring into the summer, on how to do those sorts of things better to make sure that we're capturing attendance accurately and using that data effectively. We had behavior training offered in July and are doing ongoing sessions with the Code of Conduct. As you know, we revised our Code of Conduct, and actually in some of these feedback sessions had realized that it's an understanding of the code or misunderstandings of the code that can sometimes lead to incorrect designations for certain infractions. So it's really important for us as a district to make sure that all school leaders know exactly what the code is, what's in the code, and how to use it effectively. So we've been doing ongoing trainings on that as well. Our Office of Home and Hospital. We've been engaging in various sessions. We had a mental health policies and procedures session. That's going to be happening on August 29th. We always conduct homelessness training. It's very important not only to be able to support students who are already identified as homeless, but to be able to provide schools with the right tools in order to identify folks in the future if they become homeless and to provide them with the effective supports they need. And of course, we always provide immunization supports, July all the way through September. I believe this also comes into play when we do the operational readiness for schools. Immunizations, as you know, is a very important part of getting a good start to the school year. Interscholastic athletics. We are continuing our work with Under Armour, both with the facility improvement program and providing schools with game day, on-field and game day apparel to all of our student athletes. And we also have the Positive Coaching Alliance trainings. Okay, specific school models and initiatives. 21st century. So we have several schools that are coming on board throughout the course of this year and into 2020. So the Office of 21st Century Learning supports them over the course of the summer, providing professional development to those schools and instructional leadership teams in the areas of which those schools are focused. So STEM, typically, there's some arts focus as well. So they're working on providing those, and those will typically happen this month in August. Our SIG4 schools, the 100% Project folks, have been engaged with capturing kids' hearts. Their staff comes back on Monday. Lucky staff, and the student are coming back on August 26th. So prior to the students coming back, they're engaging in the Capturing Kids' Hearts community, school building retreat. And then you've seen this acronym before. Our Coordinated Early Intervention Support Schools, our CEIS schools, had the opportunity to engage in Wilson language training over the course of this summer. And we had the CEIS Institute, which took place in July and focused on MTSS, leveraging data effectively to support CEIS identified students. In the appendix, you'll see all the schools that are associated with 21st Century, the 100% Project, and CEIS. Just for your FYI. Okay.
Thank you.
So we're doing a lot of things.
Yes. You are. You didn't realize how much you were doing.
It's a lot. Yes.
It is. It's exciting.
It is.
Exciting to hear. Yeah, it's a nice beginning. Thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
questions? Okay, Ron.
With the academic and the wholeness prep piece, how were folks informed about those programs?
Sure. So all of our academic offerings, I'm going to answer that in two ways, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All of our academic offerings, and this will include the Student Wholeness Intensive Learning site work that we've done, was made available and public through a course guide. Every summer, we put together a course guide that is communicated out through Leadership Action Update. It's sent directly to principals. It's sent to teachers. And it's available online on our website.
So folks choose to participate?
Oh, correct. Yep. Sure, yes, it's a choice for sure. Now at our intensive learning sites, which we post in there as well, again, it's the summer, so required is not a word that we tend to use too often. However, our intensive learning sites, have really bought into the work that we're doing, and so even though it was published there, we've had communications with them ongoing in terms of like RSPs and different kind of registration mechanisms, just because that's a bit of a closer touch in that direct PD from our office.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are all of our schools staffed with principals?
That's not a question I don't think I could answer. Allison, I'm not sure if, it's okay. He had asked if all of our schools are staffed with principals at this point.
Oh, I think with the exception of charter schools, I think that they are all staffed with principals at this point.
Already, and what about the teacher vacancies, do we know?
So we have a biweekly meeting where we do school readiness. So we've made a lot of progress on teacher vacancies. We definitely still have some. We're ahead of where we've been in past years.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have, and it's not a question as much as maybe as just a follow-up, you can send it to me, but I know there was a lot of work done with the joint group that looked at the code of conduct.
Yes.
And some of the recommendations that came from it. You mentioned that the code has been revised, but I would just like some update in terms of some of those recommendations, especially in terms of to the community.
Great.
And families.
No problem. Happy to provide that.
Thank you.
Yes.
And finally, the 21st century schools, they're all on track to open when we said that they would open.
Yeah, so we have two opening this fall. Then we have another two that are opening mid-year, and they're all on track.
Thanks.
Yes, and so behind you, just to illuminate which schools those are.
Yeah, I don't live too far away from the Rodwell building, and it's so nice to see what's happening in that community with that school.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Great, thank you. And I think we're ready for procurement.
I just have,
Yeah, I'm gonna send them to you.
I can't hear you.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Vogel, the Interim Director of Procurement. We have 21 items on the agenda today.
Yeah. It's that time of year.
Yeah, it is.
So I
first-
think,
Go ahead.
forgive me, I think we can just, if we have questions, we can
Which ones?
ask about them versus going through each. Is that okay?
Okay.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, okay, I have one question.
About,
Okay.
so which one?
I have about junior achievement, that
Okay.
one. Oh, that's number 2.
That's
quick, I wasn't-
12.02.
And you know what, all the information is there, all the information is there, but I wasn't quite understanding if it's how this program is gonna run and where the location would be. I wasn't getting that too clearly. Could you explain that number 2? Because you have bus services, but it doesn't exactly say, well, it's not listed in the, in your document where the students will be going, and I wasn't clear about that.
You want to take a crack at answering that?
Sure. So Danny Heller, manager of college and career readiness, and so they go to to BizTown, which is actually, I believe, but don't quote me, it's in another county. So the procurement primarily pays for the transportation for the students to get to that location.
You know, I understood all of that, but in the document, it didn't show any information of where the activity would be held. And I read it over and over, and I said, am I missing something here? And it's just not there. But it should say Owens Mills, or it doesn't matter, just add that in there. You know.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. You can just add it in before the
Yeah, just
August
add where
27th meeting.
You're paying for
Absolutely.
buses to go to different locations, and when you're evaluating the cost of a bus, it's always good to know how far the distance because of the cost, you know, and then when you see what we're charging, or they're charging us for the bus service, it's good to know where they're going to be housing or where the program is going to be held. That's what I need to know.
Absolutely. We'll put that in there for the full board.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
And with that junior achievement item, how are the transportation costs determined? And how are they determined? And could we potentially find cheaper bus companies, or no, we don't?
So the way this particular procurement works is we pay junior achievement,
And they do all of that?
and they do all the coordination for us.
Okay, thank you. I
Yeah.
have two general, I'm sorry.
Can I just add to what you're saying? I think, doesn't it go out for bids if it's X amount of money? That's how
So
they determine. It goes out to bids, and each contractor determines, put a bid in for it,
But from what he's saying, junior achieved, we pay them, and they handle
and they
all of
handle
tho-
all of
those
that.
costs.
Okay, thank you.
We just happen to see them in the breakdown.
Okay,
Thank you for that. I have two general questions for procurement, though. First, Chief Jones probably will be able to help with this. But why are ESSA, can you refresh us and remind us on why ESSA evidence ratings are important? And how should they influence our decisions when it comes to procurement?
Great question. It's a popular topic. So the ESSA evidence levels have been included in the procurement item so that we have visibility on the front end where the standards have been met. That would actually give us the ability to use the federal funds to support those activities. So it allows us to do two things. One is it gives you a level of confidence on the front end that we have that flexibility, but then it also sort of sets the stage for our awareness around where these higher standard items are, so that eventually we can make more and more decisions to be able to see where we have options, where we have higher ESSA evidence levels available, that we might want to use more of those items versus those that may have lower levels. So some of this is not just about the compliance, but it's about us building an awareness so that we can enhance our decision-making when it comes to our determination of what we think would be more effective.
That's helpful. Thank you. And then for the PQS process, how and when can providers or vendors be considered for the PQS process? Can you explain the PQS process?
Yes, we advertise that on the Maryland State Marketplace. It's a state-run website. For those of us that are old enough, it's the old bid board. A lot of the LEAs, state agencies, pretty much anyone in the state of Maryland can use that site, so we advertise on there. That way then vendors then that are registered get notice of the fact that the solicitation is advertised. We also, if we know vendors that we want to get to specifically, we let them know that it's being advertised on that site. We also advertise on Baltimore City's website.
So vendors have to go through that site in order to,
I'm sorry. Yes, we post all of our documents on that site, correct.
okay. With, thank you. I have some questions, but I'm going to send them through the board office for
Okay.
clarification by our next public meeting.
Okay.
But with 12.05 code in schools, I'm curious to know, we just saw a procurement item in July for code in schools. So how is this one different from the board letter that we approved in July, besides the increase in the requested amount?
Laura Jones, Director of Teaching and Learning Operations.
Laura.
So in the PQS, the way we have organized the extended learning PQS is there's 4 different components, and then depending on the component, different staff members review the scope of services. So the board letter that was previously reviewed in July was under college and career readiness's component. So the types of services that code would be providing are more oriented towards college and career readiness office's work, whereas the services in the board letter, item 5 that you have here, that is specifically in school or after school academic programming that's aligned to state technology education standards.
Thank you, that's helpful. I'm just going to ask, for 2 more, and then the others I'll send. With 12.10, the middle grades partnership, curious to know which schools have been participating and which schools are planning to participate in the middle grades partnership. And then, could we potentially lose students as a result of their participation in their program to private and parochial schools? When our goal is to increase our enrollment here in city schools, not saying that the program is bad, but are we potentially losing students to those private schools and parochial schools as a result of this partnership? And then with 12.19, New Vision, it's hard for me to support this board letter because there's no evidence of effectiveness besides us using them since 2009. So I know that some schools have already allotted funds to use this program for the upcoming year. But I would be curious to know, I mean, it's more than $1 million annually that we would be saying that we're going to support this programming in our schools, but the board letter doesn't have much of any evidence to say how we benefited or how our young people have benefited from the program.
I can speak to your middle grades partnership question now if you'd prefer, or I can provide a response in writing, just whatever the board prefers.
Sure, middle grades.
Okay, so I'll have to follow up on the schools. I believe there's 9 schools that are working with middle grades partnership, and the majority, but I believe not all of them, are charter schools. I think, so the intention of the program is to provide a robust learning experience throughout the middle grades, specifically to prepare students for a highly rigorous entrance criteria high school. I think, our our intention with all of our programming for middle school is ultimately to prepare students for a highly rigorous high school experience. So I think while they do call out that there are some students that ultimately find that highly rigorous experience outside of city schools, it's not the stated goal of their program, and ultimately I think we could potentially lose other city school students to other programmatic options that their families and themselves ultimately decide are the best choice for them when they're entering ninth grade. So I hear the concern that there could be students that participate in this, and in part because of their participation in this, they ultimately leave the district. But I think we could probably argue that we're keeping some families in the district because of their participation in this as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Afternoon, Eric Banzak, Coordinator of Student Wholeness, and I could answer your question or try to answer your question for New Vision if you could just repeat it so I can make sure I have it.
There's no evidence of effectiveness for the program in the board letter, so I was curious to see why the letter's coming to us without any evidence of how the program has worked since 2009.
Mm-hmm.
It just says in the letter that we've been in partnership with the organization since 2009, but it doesn't really speak to any benefits of the program and how the program has actually increased student achievement as a result of our awarding of the procurement letter.
So when we reviewed the application, we saw a lot of qualitative data of testimonies from principals that used the services. Last year they were in 9 schools, and we received a lot of testimonies that the work that they were providing to students, they felt was very successful. And with that and with the testimony, and we noted that in the board letter that they weren't ESSA approved on that. But my understanding was that they were a level 4, and then due to not so many data, or they were removed. I don't know, Chief, if you could speak to that they were a level 4, and then they, about the process that they were a level 4 when we looked them up, but then now they're not a level 4. So I didn't understand that process, but that was a.
So I'll explain the process. I don't
Okay.
know the specific circumstances for this submission. So what Eric is mentioning in terms of a level 4, essentially, if we have an item that has been submitted for review and it hasn't already had an existing research study that would allow it to qualify for a level 1, 2, or 3, it can be classified as a level 4 if there is a logic model, a theory of action, a research basis, et cetera, that we can use to support actually doing some type of research around it to be able to confirm that it does provide a benefit to our students. So having said that, I don't know these circumstances around what was or was not submitted. I think the question, aside from the ESSA evidence level piece of it, just also goes to what data do we have, what has been our district experience that can at least give us some understanding. So I wouldn't say that everything that comes before the board has to have an ESSA evidence to be worthy of investment. I think some of it comes down to what do we collectively agree gives us confidence that what we're doing is the right investment, and we have reason to believe it's going to have a positive impact going forward.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know the particulars of this specific submission. We can certainly take that back to our OAA team to see what has been submitted, so that that additional information can be incorporated into the board letter. But I also just encourage those that submitted it to think beyond that, because if it doesn't qualify for a level 4, that doesn't mean that we can't have anything represented, especially if we've had 10 years of experience in working with the
I
vendor.
appreciate that, because I actually wasn't concerned about the ESSA. I'm learning about that, so I wasn't really concerned about that, but really it is very vague as to how we've benefited, how young people have benefited from the program, that's all.
If I might, I'm just reading through the letter, and perhaps if you just give more information around the evaluation that was done, some details might be helpful.
Yep, I could do that. Yep.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we have 3 people signed up for public comment. 3. And first is Ms. Kim Trueheart.
Ms. Trueheart. Good afternoon.
I mean, it's still good to see you, Ms. Trueheart.
We're just glad to see you.
I will say that I am here in continuation of my protest at the Board of Estimates on the 10th of July. That day, I protested a contract for $289,000 to do grass cutting. I felt that some of that money for grass cutting, low-skilled work, needed to be targeted to young African Americans in this city who have the highest unemployment rate in the state, possibly the nation. Our chief executive in Washington touts 3% unemployment. Here in Maryland and Baltimore, we got a 6% unemployment rate. So I'm looking at your procurement agenda item for Sega Innovations, and I'm saying, there's no evidence there, and thank you, Commissioner McFadden, for bringing that issue. There's no evidence that these folks have done good work. Their website touts that they have a few schools in Massachusetts, and they're entering the New York City market, but they've done no work here. Now, I've got a group here in this city who has lots of evidence that they know how to do math tutoring, and I don't see them on this list, and that troubles me. It troubles me because they're young residents of this city who could be benefiting from these jobs. I don't know about you, but my math says $750,000 is a lot of money. And if nothing else, I really think that this board would be remiss if it did not segment this contract to ensure that a local minority-run enterprise gets some of the benefit. And there is lots of evidence. The last time I recall on the board agenda when there were after-school programs that were evaluated, and the Baltimore Algebra Project got stellar results that were touted as exceeding the capabilities of some of the math teachers. And so why aren't they on this list? That's my question. They need to be on this list. The city government spends $49.9 million in low-skilled work, grass cutting, alley cleaning, property boarding. 49, you get me? $49.9 million. And now y'all contributing $750,000 to that madness where no young blacks get jobs? Y'all gotta be crazy. No, I'm not gonna sit here and tolerate this. No, where's the equity in this?
To your point, Ms. Trueheart, has a question for procurement or anyone else, has the Algebra Project or organizations like that participated in that PQS process to be considered?
Hello again. Baltimore Algebra Project did submit to the same PQS that you see recommendations for in the agenda today. They are still being evaluated. There's been a request for some follow-up information.
Okay.
So they're still under consideration. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
What does that mean? How much money are we spending on math tutors? $750,000? Is that it? Is there any more money that could possibly go to the algebra or are we spending it all on this favorite friend from Boston?
What I thought I just heard is that the Baltimore Algebra Project is still under consideration.
Because there is money available
Well,
to put them on contract.
I guess I'm making an assumption, or that we wouldn't
Yeah,
they
well-
wouldn't still be under consider. We'll follow up. We'll follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Especially before we vote on it later this month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Was there another someone
I,
signed up.
just for
Oh, I'm sorry.
clarification, my understanding for this listing is that what is developed is a group of possibilities that schools can choose from. So the amounts are not saying that they all are going to be actually used up. So from what we just heard, then, if the algebra project meets the qualifications, they would be included in this list. The schools then choose from the vendors.
That's right. It's an up to amount that would be between all the schools who use it. And so schools, all schools are part of our procurement process. So if any one school participates, then that counts towards the upper amount, but it does not mean that that is the amount that's being spent. It's the total amount that could be spent between all the schools.
Okay.
Ms. Goodwin? Welcome.
Hello, Teaching and Learning Committee. Today I'm here to speak about the proposed assessment calendar. I have
Assessment.
Put the mic a little closer.
about the proposed assessment calendar. I have attended several meetings, and I've noticed an increase in assessments. There's actually another math assessment for kindergarten, going from the beginning, middle, and end of the year to quarterly. Now, we must remember that these assessments in kindergarten through second grade are 101. So the more assessments, the more time the teacher is taking from engaging with her students or his students. Second, modules are not listed. However, teachers are being told that these assessments has to be completed during that network meeting. So again, I'm finding a situation where teachers are being told one thing in certain meetings, and then the community is being told another. Distance plus seat time equals administration of testing, yet the district is only using seat time. Where's the consideration for some middle schools and high schools, being that we know that they take midterms and finals? So we have all of this testing in between, and they still have to take midterms and finals. All of this take away from instruction. Number 5, being that already shows growth, we know that teachers are going to take the BOY already, and either the MOY or the EOY already. Again, this was discussed in the committee meetings, and here we are yet again doing the same exact thing that we discussed that happens will take up more instructional time, being that teachers have to meet their SLOs or principals have to meet their SLOs or whatever the case may be to show growth. Whether intentional or unintentional, the lackadaisical schedule, in my perspective, never was intended to take a deep dive into the assessment calendar, nor to survey the field about dissonance, or to educate the people in the committee about each assessment. I say this because the committee did not convene in January of 2018. It started in September of 2018 and met every other month, with a couple of meetings being a dud because of miscommunication. Parents and teachers have expressed that district assessment should not be a part of students' grades, yet so much teaching is being done by teachers that they have no choice, because the teacher tests will take even more time from instruction.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin. I hear your concern. Thank you. Say it again. Christina Duncan Evans.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Pleased to be here. I'm going to ask that the board take a look at 2 of the PowerPoints that were presented earlier tonight, because I'm going to reference some of the alphabet soup acronyms I'd like that appear in charts and graphs, and so I'd like for you to be able to see what I'm seeing and reference what I'm referencing. So in the presentation where we have the school year 1920 assessment strategy, on slide 8, the district lists its mandated ELA tests. Among those on slide 8 that are listed are the Wit and Wisdom end of module assessments. Those are given for grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. Again, the second row calls those district mandated assessments. When you then take a look at the projected assessment seat times for traditional schools, those end of module assessments don't appear. However, the state code says that district mandated assessments should appear in this listing. So my question is, why is there an inconsistency between one list of district mandated assessments and a second list that is used to calculate whether or not the 2.2% threshold is being met? That's my first question. My second question, or actually 1A, is that same question but for LDCs. I had not previously thought of LDCs as district mandated assessments, but they are listed under district mandated assessments. And if teachers are required to upload data, then there's a mandate there. So I'm wondering also why LDCs are not listed in the seat times. I have an additional concern. My second question is about retesters. So I looked on the Maryland report card earlier today and found that our pass rate for English 10 is 15.8%, which means that 84.2% of our high school students are retaking PARCC and later MCAP tests as a graduation requirement. What this means is that we have a huge portion of our 11th and 12th graders whose time doesn't appear to be valued because it's not being reflected in any of these testing cap requirements. If students are constantly retaking tests in their 11th and 12th grade, what does it say that they're not included when we make a calculation about valuable instructional time lost? We're not valuing the time of the students who have demonstrated that they need instructional time the most. My third question is around this question of administration time. A 15-minute test that's given one-on-one to a kindergartner, you might remember while you were in kindergarten being called to the teacher's desk to read a set of words. Tests are still given in that one-on-one sense. And so a 15-minute test can take 2.5 weeks to administer. And if a teacher's taking 2.5 weeks to test their kindergarten class, that's 2.5 weeks that they're not instructing. I know that a lot of class sizes in kindergarten ideally are under 20. My own personal experience is that I've only taught kindergarten classes in excess of 30 students. That's my experience, right? And that's not generalizable, but it really does impact testing to say that we're going to give a 15-minute assessment 4 times a year. I think when you magnify that by the actual time it takes to test each student one-on-one for those 15 minutes, you come away with a very different understanding of how kindergarten time is being spent. If the intent of the law is to have more time learning and less time testing, and these caps are set at 2.2%, to say that 15 minutes is spent on testing doesn't in any way validate or go along with the spirit of the law. So my third question is about this question of administration.
Those were your, thank you. Thank you for bringing these concerns, and we will look into it and get back to you at another time.
Christina, can you email them to me also?
Sure.
Your questions, thanks.
Will I get a response?
Would you email them to me? I would like to look through them, and I'll forward them to the board executive so that staff can take a look at them. But I would like to look at them a little bit more intently, so it doesn't seem so rushed as the meeting was scheduled to end at 5:30. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any other business? Any other business? Thank you all very much, and have a lovely evening. Thank you.